Uh, I think we are really up to capacity here. So Sudipto and Soumya, can you just manage the door so that we are uninterrupted? All right, all right. So let's get started. So welcome and congratulations, everyone. You have made it to one of the most interesting panels of the day. So give a round of applause to yourself. All right, perfect. So don't be sorry for a photo. We'll start. Okay, let's take a moment. Yeah, you, come on, Jules. You can do this. All right, let's have a photo. Okay. Yeah. Okay, you're good. All right, thank you. One more real jump. Okay, so back to the business. So I'm going to be your MC for the day, for the session, and let me do a couple of things which I listed for myself in the opening. So one, this is being organized by NASSCOM in collaboration with FPF, and as we know that Future of Privacy Forum does a lot of interesting work. So we are very happy to be collaborating with them as we get into this discussion. Uh, Now, the topic is policy to practice, and we are going to test that on governance. And this is not just a conversation which we are happening today in isolation. And in lead up to this summit, there were a series of pre-summit meetings which were going deep just into that conversation. And I can understand some of you were not in that hall, in that meeting, in those rooms, but I think two, three things really stood out. One is the fact that how do you think of intent when you think of governance from an industry lens? And then how do you think about the science of putting that intent into practice? And a lot of frictions happen because of that. Second, sometimes intent itself is under pressure. There is competition, there is engagement, there is time to deployment. Those are the areas when governance come into pressure. So we're going to go deeper into that. And ultimately, I think it is also about shared responsibility. So when we think about the shared responsibility, where it hits friction in terms of governance is that when we somehow attempt to pass on the responsibility to the other stakeholder rather than building the responsibility with us. And this is true for all stakeholders. It can be true for regulators, it can be true for users, and it can also be true for the industry. So I think that's a broad lens in terms of saying that the work has been done and we are going to build it forward. So now, without much ado, and by the way, I am Ashish Agarwal. I head public policy at NASSCOM. I've been doing this for some time, and it's my privilege to have such an interesting set of speakers. And what I'm going to do is that I'm going to straight away dive into this conversation. So very lucky to have you, Karina, as part of this forum. And I said lucky because it is just so timely that you have a report that has really put the evidence of where the science is in some of these things when we think about governance. And that's so important because ultimately we need to base ourselves in the reality of what is happening. And so Karina Prunki is a researcher at IRIA, and she's a senior research fellow at the Oxford University, and she's also the lead writer of this AI safety report, which has just come out. It's a 173 pages report. I know a lot of people don't read, but if you are in this session today, you are already converted. If you are not read it, please read that report. So Karina, I'm going to straight away come to the topic. In terms of, typically sometimes I try to go into the big picture, but with you I'm going to go into the nuts and bolts. So we talk about open weight models, and there is so much good about them in terms of what they can enable people to do, the fact that they can make access to models much more in a way which is cost effective, and really allow a lot of the people across the value chain of AI to do so much more. But then they also come with their own risks. And as much as I understand, once the open weight models are put into the market, then it's not that you can put the genie back into the bottle. So from that point of view, I think to help us understand what is it that you are seeing in terms of the evidence to say that where does governance sit. So the trade-off is to make open weighted models more and more accessible and available, but from a governance point of view, where do you think we are in terms of confidence levels? Where do you think are there ways to measure this well? And also which are the areas where governance would be non-negotiable in terms of if you weigh it against making the models available, where you would say that no, in those areas we cannot do this unless ABC is met. So really you have about, I took maybe a lot of time to explain this question, but I'll give you more than double the time to give an answer. Thank you, Karina. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I also should say that we have a 20-page policymaker summary of the report, so you don't have to dive into the 173 pages. So yes, so open weight models are a tricky beast because, as Ashish said, once they're out there, and it's really difficult to take them back or to modify them. So when we think about how to evaluate the risks of open weight models, we first have to ask ourselves, or open weight systems, we first have to ask ourselves, what is being released. It makes a difference whether it's the weights, the parameters of the models, or whether it's also the training data, whether there's also, whether the model has like a tool belt that allows it to use tools. So that's the first step. What is it that is being released? Because that bears on how we can apply safeguards. The second step is to measure what can a model do, so the capabilities. So very often the capabilities of systems directly translate into the risks. So you might have, for example, a system that's very good at detecting flaws in software, so software vulnerabilities. That allows you to patch up software, to find the flaws and to patch them, but it also allows you to find the flaws and exploit them. So there is always this dual use potential of general purpose AI. So understanding the capabilities of an open weight model also gives you an understanding of the potential risk that model might pose. Then the third step would be to understand the misuse potential of the model. So how easy is it to remove the safeguards? And how easy is it, for example, to fine-tune a model to output harmful content? And you can test that. I mean, the way to test it is, it's currently an evolving landscape, so it's quite hard to test it. But you can try to adversarially fine-tune your model to create harmful outputs. And this misuse potential is, of course, a big factor when we think about the safety of open weight models. Just to give you an example, open weight systems are now regularly used to, there are thousands of open weight systems out there that have been fine-tuned to output pornographic content or CSAM material. So this is really a challenge that we're seeing currently. Now, the last step that would be to do some ecosystem monitoring. So basically understanding, who has modified the model, or a fine-tuned version was based on which model, so model provenance, and just understanding how open weight models develop over the course of their lifespan. Now, I think one of the biggest mistake that's being made in governance is often to just confuse or to compare open weight models, open weight systems with closed weight systems, but they're very different, as Ashish said, because we can tamper open weight models, we can jailbreak them, we can fine-tune them to produce harmful content, and once they're out, it is really difficult to navigate that. Now, just bridging over to the governance part, so from a governance perspective, the best thing to do is to try to govern the model before it is released. So, for example, a good release strategy would be to first test an open weight model and have have only a small circle of researchers access to the model in order to figure out how safe it is, how easily safeguards can be removed. There are also some technical ways you can, technical techniques that you can use to make open weight models a bit more resistant to tampering. For example, data curation or some unlearning techniques. All of those are in the early stages.
So, is there an example of a good open weight model release which you have seen, or is there an example of a bad model release which you have seen in the open weight category? Just real world, anything?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to point fingers here, but just to give you a good example would be to have the staged release, to have first, only have a limited amount of people access to the model, and then before letting it out, also to have good ecosystem monitoring in place. And a bad example would be, what we're currently seeing with, deepfake image generation, where there's really a big ecosystem of models that can be easily used or are fine-tuned. I mean, there are thousands of models out there that can be fine-tuned to generate CSAM material.
All right, great. So, no, thank you for that, Karina. I'm going to come to you, Jules. And I know we have been discussing and you have been really looking at this landscape for a very long time. So, but we are now in the context of AI. So, when you look at jurisdictions across the world, I mean, in some sense, what is really hard to do in practice today? So we can look at it in two lenses, and I'll go back to this original theme that where the intent is aligned, but then again, in terms of technical limits, unclear measurement, we are not able to meet the governance expectation. And the other is where the challenge comes from the incentives in terms of what we talked about, competition or user engagement and so on and so forth. And where do you see those tensions sit, and what is it that you think is working, where we have probably, the traditional tools of risk management, audit, and all of those other governance mechanisms work very well in this AI world, and where do you think they don't, and therefore that adds a dimension where we still don't have a fix. Any thoughts on that? And you can obviously compare some geographies, but it'll be good to get some real sense in terms of examples.
Thanks, and I'll share based on where I sit. And so Future Privacy Forum is comprised of the chief privacy leaders of 200 plus companies, many global, many local, lead AI governance officers. Many of the privacy and data protection people have seized or been foisted on to play a very significant role in AI governance, even though, of course, the issues go far broader. But we also do a lot of capacity building with data protection regulators, civil society groups. So we try to be the center place where the academics and civil society and people who are thinking the hard issues through come together to talk, to compare notes, to come up with those best practices. So the challenge many of these organizations have had at the beginning is, who in this area of AI, where it's permeating every aspect from how you deal with employees to how you market to how you do research, who has their arms around this? Is it the privacy lead? Well, they don't have the full scope. Are there these new AI, responsible AI people? They may not have sort of the full scope. So we're seeing a huge scramble to figure out, what does your infrastructure look like? And if you're not a giant global company with lots of people and lots of capacity, where do you situate this? Is this a legal role? Is it too technical for the legal folks to lead? Here's what we're seeing. We saw initially many of the privacy and legal people sort of grab it. They know how to deal with those regulators. Who was the first regulator to sort of say to OpenAI, stop, you may not operate in my country? The Garante, the Italian data protection regulator, right? So many of them were the first to step up, but they didn't necessarily get additional resources. And they initially started creating a little bit of a gatekeeping, a little bit of a choke point. At the same time, the business was all in. We have to go, we have to move. If we don't move fast, we're gonna be, disintermediated by all the competitors. We can't wait for you to tell us exactly what this means under the EU AI Act, and we can't wait for you to tell us exactly what does anonymization under the data protection, law in India going to look like. And so we see the business now hiring its people to scale, maybe the nice way to put it, to scale AI governance. But now they're doing impact assessments, and the data protection lead is doing the same but different impact assessment to comply with automated decisioning, to comply with California's laws, to comply with global laws that look the same, that are about, assessing whether or not the data can be used for training. So still a little bit of chaos and a lot of diversity, and organizations actually figuring what's the role of the humans. And all of those humans now are trying to lean a little bit harder on AI to do these sort of assessments and to sort of scale governance. And of course, we know all the issues around, accuracy and so on and so forth, but the tools are getting, quicker, and the feedback I'm getting from people who've trained models on years of assessments and years of reviews, that they're getting very good, quick information. They still have to do some work, and obviously, but they're getting surprisingly, increasingly good results. I'll add just one more piece. You raised the incentives and the pressures, and I'm old enough to have lived through, I was the chief privacy officer at AOL once upon a time, and I was old enough to sort of live through, wow, websites are exciting and there's ads, and we all love the ads, it keeps everything free. And then we saw all the critique and concern, is the advertising, stealing data, marketing too aggressively, doing all these sorts of things, because we didn't have really good baselines. And even though good actors were trying to live up to some responsible level of standard, lots of other companies and startups and this, it's hard to hold the line when somebody else is increasingly going one step further. And so we made a little bit of a mess, and we have a lot of negative reaction, regulatory reaction around the world around ad tech. And then when mobile launched, everybody was going to be very respectful. It's location information. No one's going to use something sensitive like that. And then again, we saw sort of the pressures. So it's urgent that we have, whether it's law, best practices, standards, it's urgent that we have clear, understandable baselines. Otherwise, the competitive pressures over time end up forcing a bit of a rush to the bottom, but also make it hard. We are so dependent on each other in this business, right? Everyone is not building a foundation model. Everybody's working with tools that are built on other tools, that are built on other tools, that are built on other tools. You can't comply unless an entire chain of companies are all in the same boat about what it actually means to not be biased. What does it mean to have legitimately collected the data? So we need those consensus rules, whether it's law, policy, industry standards. The faster we can put them in place, even if they're not perfect and we can tweak them over time, the sooner we can ensure that the incentives are fair.
All right, Jules. So, no, thank you very much. I think there is a bit of a progress is what I'm sensing from what we heard till now. And also this point you made, right, said we don't want a race to the bottom, rather than what we want is people to shine the light on the good practices and create more momentum around that. So, Gail, now you have heard the scientist, you have heard the think tank, but it is a place like Google where the rubber hits the road, right? So, and Gail she's the Director of Global Affairs and Public Policy at Google. So, given where you sit in terms of multiple jurisdictions and so on and so forth, I'm going to focus your attention on the entire idea of looking at the world as a fragmented place when it comes to regulation. So the question for you is that when do you choose to apply one set of governance, let's say you can call it tools, you can call it a standard, and when you try to do what the local law requires in terms of localizing. And then, and this is to get your baseline. But then I also want to understand, is there an example where you have said, all right, the baseline is good, but we are going to raise the bar and we are going to apply something which is to a higher standard of governance, and we will do it globally. So help us understand that, Gail. Yeah.
Yeah, and thank you for that question. And it's great to be here in a country that itself is thinking about and demonstrating so much diversity. And I think if I'm going to hopefully pull a couple of like Indian examples to show how we're thinking about this global versus local. I think my starting point is to say it's not an either or. If you're building a product that is used, like search, which is used by billions of users around the world, you really need to be thinking about both. And you're not going to achieve a product that has the level of success that search has over the last 20 years and that we hope Gemini will have without thinking about both like the local and the global. So I think ours, it's like two starting points. First of all, we very much think that when you're building products, and particularly when you're thinking about governance, you have to be doing it in partnership. We know that our users do not expect us to be coming up unilaterally with our own sort of like principles. They expect us to be doing that in partnership, really with sort of like 3 other entities. So they expect us to be acting responsibly. They also expect us to be working with governments. They expect us to be thinking about their needs, but they very much expect us to be using the great knowledge, whether it's from academia or from think tanks, to inform how we're thinking. So that's sort of like partnership and governance is absolutely critical. The other thing that we spend a lot of time thinking about are what are those principles that are raising the bar. And for us on AI, it is like our foundational principles are ones about being like are universal. So they're about being socially beneficial. They're about avoiding unfair bias, building and testing for safety, and being accountable to people. And that's really bedrock of the products that we're building using AI. So whether that's search, Gemini, or anything that we're doing in cloud. So let's start with like safety and like what does that look like in terms of building a global standard. And very much our goal is to make sure we are producing safe systems, because we know that when it comes to systems that are trusted, people have an expectation of safety. They also have a clear expectation of privacy, and we're not going to get trust if we're not thinking about those. So what does it look like when we're thinking about safety in Gemini? We're thinking about the model itself. How can we make all the things that you talked about, like how can we make sure that it is itself a safe model, whether that's about what the model itself can do or what users could use it for. How does that then, what does that then look like when the models are implemented in products like Gemini? How can we define those principles and then make sure that we are testing and constantly about how things might operate locally. So let me give sort of like 2 examples of how we might think about that locally, and what nuance that we need to understand. And this is really where having those conversations with users, with governments, and with civil society really helps locally as well. So what we know about our users in India is they are the biggest users of multimodality. So what that means is that while some other countries might just be reading text, in India there is a huge reliance on video, on audio, on images to both convey information and to understand information. So what does that mean in terms of like, we need to think about that local content when we're thinking about safety and when we're thinking about privacy and when we're thinking about governments more generally. The other point that a sort of a slightly different way of thinking about it is when we're thinking about risk, what is the benefit of some of the products that we are producing that might help the Indian government and other governments understand about risk. So tomorrow you can come and listen to me talk in a different panel about creativity and AI. So what are some of the benefits that you can get from image generation as well as some of the risks? And that then plays into very much like what are the governance models that we need to put in place.
All right. My last bit was about an example. I don't know whether that came through, but if I were to give you a choice between an example to also reflect on what Jules spoke about, right? Given in the context of AI, the speed with which models are released is important. And we know that, if I'm not going to repeat some of the past, but I think Google has probably held itself to a certain standard in terms of how you think about it. So any reflections on how that plays out? Is it a tension or not a problem?
I think because our AI principles are there regardless of what the model is, we are always holding ourselves to that standard. Like we take our responsibility to be bold and responsible very seriously, because it doesn't, we might know how many different versions of the Gemini model have come out. That's not what our users are necessarily thinking about. We know that they expect the same standards of safety and privacy regardless of what the model is. So it's like it is a standard regardless of how quickly we have to get models out.
No, that's good to reiterate, and really appreciate that. I'm going to come to you, Ivana. Ivana, you are the Global Privacy and AI Governance Officer at Wipro. It used to be a nice and boring world. We were happily going around and doing what we do as IT services industry, and now AI happened. And suddenly we are a part of the same exciting bunch. And in governance, boring is the high standard. So when you think about that, and in this AI world, and you are wearing the deployer hat, so is the governance sitting with the client? Is it where is your skin in the game in terms of governance? So that's the kind of a context I want to lay out, and then I want to also understand that. So that's point number one. The sub part of this is that so you are doing what your client is asking you to do. So therefore, does governance come into your track at all? And the third question is, can you also give me an example to illustrate where the client wants a solution, you know what you're doing, you tell them, look, you're going to do this, but unless you do this well, this is going to bite you in terms of where it matters. And then obviously these are business decisions, so there are cost implications and all of that. That also probably comes in. So how is that conversation really shaping up, and help us understand, therefore, what is really a deployer ecosystem sitting in the governance context, and what is the importance of it, and what do you do? Ivana.
Easy question. So first of all, I wanted to say thank you for this panel. I want to say thank you for NASCOM. As you know, Wipro work very closely with you, and thank you for all the work that you do in championing, especially right now, the IT ecosystem here in India. And I wanted to say thank you to the Privacy Future Forum, the Future Privacy Forum, for the inspiration that they've given me over the years. And I wanted to answer your questions. I just wanted to start when Jules pick it up, because Jules said, in companies we've had these, at the beginning it was the privacy people who went into this field because we have an understanding of risk, we have an understanding of how to run a global program and all of this. And it's exactly what happened to many organizations, including mine. I was Chief Privacy Officer and I took on AI governance. I actually took the initiative to take it on. And then what happened was that we did what many organizations do. Many deploy organizations as well. What we do is you set up a task force, you bring the entire company together, and then you realize one thing. You realize that it's not enough. And you realize this as a deployer in the first place, because you realize that the customers out there, they want you to be proactive, and they're not just there to say, hey, I want to innovate like this and just do it for me. They say, I expect that what you do is compliant, is safe, brings long-term value. So you need to really change the way that you think about it. So what I did was, and I am grateful that at my company I was given the leeway and the freedom to set up the governance structure as I and others thought it was important to do. And a lot of teaching that came through your organizations have been really useful to me. So what we did was, let's shift the narrative. So the narrative here is the governance is not a tick-the-box exercise of compliance. It's not. It's actually part of our strategy, capacity to generate growth and to offer our clients sustainable long-term value. This is a mindset shift that is not easy. It's not easy.
Do you get pushback?
I can't say. I can't say. I've got people watching from my company. I can't say. But no, I mean, no, because first, I'm good at what I do, hey? And second, because there is a real understanding now. But it's not an easy change. And it's not an easy change because many organizations like ours, across the world, we've been just saying, okay, the clients will tell us what to do, we do it. And it doesn't work like that. So I go to client meetings, and I say to them, and they expect us to work together. They say, you bring on the Google tool, you bring all this tool, you bring this open source tool. How are you actually protecting me? And that's where you have the whole discussions. And some of it, they go on to the liability side. So we had to upskill a lot of our legal teams, and that was part of the governance to make sure that we can handle these conversations. So part of the governance is the legal team, the vendor team, because obviously you work with a lot of third party, with Google, with many others, and we say, okay, where does the responsibility end? You know, there is another big theme. And then you sit with the client where you discuss, they say, for example, take agentic AI. Now the big thing, everybody wants to go agentic. And of course there are massive issues. But you sit with the client and they want to roll it out and you say no. And you want the example. I can't give you the client, but I'll give you the example. The client says, we want to roll it out. We want to go 50% agentic. You say, hold on a sec. There are risks here. You have cascading hallucinations. You have to define what is your human intervention. And it's not the same for everybody. What does it mean to be meaningful? Hold on. We're going to do, we suggest that you do a rollout, which is, one step at a time. We start with the easiest areas, where there are less risk, and then we roll it out.
All right. No, I'm just giving you a hand signal because I'm the conversation because this is the first round and I want to give him that space. So we all know X, we all know Grok, we know SpaceX, and we have Wilfredo, who is representing XAI. So a very interesting place. So from what I thought was a boring kind of a conversation, which is already interesting on the deployer model. And deployers, just for you to understand, are doing a lot of heavy lifting when it comes to governance. But moving on from that, Wilfredo, I'm going to pose that trade-off thing for you, because we kind of look at it in a way that sometimes governance is binary and you just do it. But I think there are important questions which we should really understand. So when we think about in terms of input and output, so think of input as going into the AI. And therefore, what metric for governance is probably in terms of transparency, and then the output is the content, which is out there, and then the breaks we apply in terms of making sure that the content is not deepfake, is not misleading, and all of that. Then I think the breaks become the governance. So and the trade-off is that you are rightfully trying to protect your trade secret. And you're also probably pushing the envelope in terms of what you think in terms of speech, in terms of freedom, and all of that. So reflecting on where you are today, can you give us some examples in terms of how does governance sit in your conversation when you think about products, when you think about competition, when you think about scaling up? It'll be lovely to hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you all for being here. AI policy governance, hot ticket. But just moment of personal privilege. This is my first time in India, and this AI summit is like really incredible. Just the sheer amount of people that are here and the enthusiasm. So thank you to the government and thank you to NASCOM for having us. I need to collect just some input here just to know sort of who's in the room. I see folks of all ages. Raise your hand if you're a student. Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks for being here. And curious startups in the room, folks working on startups. Okay, great. Anyone have an X or Twitter account, as some folks call it? Okay, cool. Anyone use Grok before? Okay, great. No, that's really awesome. So I appreciate everyone's enthusiasm. And I think everyone here probably uses an AI assistant of some sort or interacts with AI every single day. So yeah, XAI is one of the several like bigger frontier labs. Though so many companies working on AI, I think it's touching every single company.
Wilfredo, you do realize I have tough follow-up questions for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
So please, let's come to the meat of this.
Sure, thank you. I did caveat it was a moment of personal privilege. So you can go to x.ai/safety right now, and you'll see some foundational documents that outline how we think about safety. Safety is everyone's job at XAI, right? It's not one particular department or team. It is foundational to what we do, and governance is foundational to the work of everyone at the company. But at that webpage, what you'll see is our Frontier AI framework. We had to rename it due to California laws that were passed last year. But it's our risk management framework, and that will go into detail on how we think about the different risks that AI may pose, how models may behave, how models evolve over time, the different types of risk, whether that's dual-use technologies, child safety risks, self-harm risks, political bias, sycophancy, all these different things. You'll also see our model cards, and those are published when we put out our models. So you'll see our Grok code model card, you'll see Grok 4 and Grok 4.1 model card, soon to be Grok 4.20, which will be released soon, that a lot of folks have been waiting on. And I think those model cards have started becoming best practices amongst the frontier labs that really get into the meat of model training, the different benchmarks that we're testing against, how we do evaluations, how we think about those different risks and those different models, because as these models advance, certain risks become more prominent or more, have more potential. So we're constantly thinking about that. And then, as we deploy these models, we have the benefit of sort of building in public. XAI and X sort of work in tandem, and we operate, one of the bigger public social media platforms. And that's also where the AI conversation is happening, where engineers are spending their time every single day, where policy researchers and others are giving us constant feedback. And so we have this really sort of building in public feedback loop that helps us sometimes mitigate these risks and make quick corrections. And so all this kind of work together, for us addressing risk.
All right, no, we are delighted to have you and welcome to India, and hopefully you'll have a much richer experience as you complete your travels. So, okay, all right. So now I'm going to be switching tracks in terms of the speed of some of this because I can see the clock and I can see our Spock looking at me, and she's still smiling, but that could change rapidly. So Karina, coming to you, wearing your scientist hat, what is that one place where regulator expectation and science is, in your sense, meeting in terms of where you see that, okay, fine, the regulators expect that from governance point of view, and we are ready from a technical point of view in some sense. And the second example is that where you see in terms of the areas of tensions where when you look forward, you will see a regulator's expectation in terms of governance increase, but there is lack of clarity in terms of what can be technically done. So for and you can also link it to the fact that if you want to explain that where perhaps technically transparency is possible, but it is not the science, but it is the other parameters like maybe commercial interests which are probably holding back transparency. But you have as much time to answer as I've taken to ask.
I'll hurry up. So I think where both could meet would be in terms of transparency around the details on how the models were trained. So there already are the safety frameworks, there are model cards, but just going into more details would be really useful to just ensure there are standardized safety evaluations and that policymakers understand how companies have evaluated and tested and built their models. Second point is, so the challenges are, one of the biggest challenge is what we call the evaluation gap in the report. So this is that very often we test our models against benchmarks, and we do that in laboratory settings. But quite regularly, the benchmark performance doesn't really translate into real-world performance or real-world safety. So you might have a model that passes a medical exam, but like for medical students, but then in real-world contexts, it still gives you misleading, potentially harmful answers in 19% of cases. So this is a big problem, and that's really one that we're going to have to look at. Like, how can we make the testing, the pre-deployment testing of models more robust?
All right, thank you. Jules, coming to you, I mean, let's look at where you expect or where you would want to drive action in terms of, governance improvements, and take some kind of a high-stake use case. You could take child safety, you could take, healthcare, you can take even an ad tech, which is in some sense the prevailing model. And what would you want to see come good, better by early 2027? Let's give it a 12-month odd window. So, and brief answer. Thank you. And I'll not use my moderator mic, so please take Ivana's mic. Yes. Yeah.
So since we're the future of Privacy Forum, let me give you a little bit of next steps, because this is what people expect and demand of us. We're seeing a lot of the leading researchers moving from focusing on scaling LLMs to spatial intelligence. So we dealt with all the issues of scraping all the text in the world, scraping all the images. Now we're scraping the real world, so that the next level of improvement can be based on understanding the physics, understanding the way physical world works. This is critical to self-driving, it's critical to medicine, it's critical to so many areas. But the people in this room who hopefully have some interest in governance are then saying, of course, wait, you're scraping what? My face? You're scraping my home? I want a robot that knows how to make coffee. It's got to watch 1 million people make coffee in their house. So quickly identifying so that we are beginning to deal with the bystander privacy issues and all of the ethics and inclusiveness issues that are going to come along with scraping the world. Quick. In India, of course, we have the Data Protection Act, and how it deals with anonymization and de-identification is going to be so critical, right? We step out of some, but not all problems when we can say, well, we de-identified the data, so we don't have a problem. But those standards are in flux, and if we don't know what's in and what's out, then how do we possibly, safeguard the data? The Europeans are moving in one direction, other jurisdictions are going in another direction. We need a little bit of clarity there, and quickly. I'll give a vote for benchmarks with the imperfections that our colleague here has pointed out, because so much of what we're talking about here is engineering driven, and when you give the engineering team, do what is reasonable here, minimize the risks of harm, they're like, give me a number, give me a metric. So we need to reduce some of this to benchmarks, effective benchmarks, hopefully, but we need benchmarks for privacy, we need benchmarks for many of these other safety and risk and governance issues. And then the last thing I'll say is, you all know sort of OneTrust and some of these other platforms that sort of launched to help with governance. And I remember saying, it's too complicated. You can't just put out a one-size-fits-all platform. But it turns out, with millions and millions of people around the world, all who don't have a lawyer sitting at their side or a governance expert or a compliance expert, we need something good enough. Every startup has some ambition of working globally, So tell them you need a whole team of lawyers dealing with all the complexity. It's impossible. So we need platforms. Credo AI just launched something. Hopefully we'll see others that give all of you free or low-cost access to decent enough advice that lets you assess, lets you have different governance frameworks sort of built in one easy way.
All right, great. One thing which I will double click is that from an India context, getting the data protection law implemented well in the next 12 odd months is really a high priority. And if that happens, it will do a lot of good for governance. And second thing is that as a tech industry, what we are interested in is how do we make technological governance tools really available to solve some of these issues, because compliance is no longer the kind of compliance that we were used to. So with that, coming to Gail again, Jules has just left you maybe 30 seconds shorter than what you would have got. But anyway, what is that one area where, potentially that you took a decision as a company where you felt that while the rules and regulations around governance were still in a gray zone, but you decided to go ahead and do something? And second is that where do you see most friction in the coming times, in the maybe next 12 to 24 months, when you think about the way AI is being rolled out, the way you have a suite of products across the length and breadth of this AI, and where really from a government point of view you see those conversations really sharpening.
So I think we're in a fortunate place in that we are generally in agreement in one area, which is that I think we're all now seeing that the risk-based approach is working. So we have that as a principle. I think an area where we're going to be really thinking about what governance looks like and what it looks like in terms of the products we're building is one that you mentioned, which is AI agents. So it's also one, it's very exciting being in California at the moment, and as it is, I think, in India as well, when we're thinking about what potential AI brings for everyone. And in particular, when we're thinking about our products like Search and Gemini that are already serving billions of people, what does it mean to be really, truly integrating AI into these in a way that we have consistently done over the last 20 years, but is offering greater opportunities. And agents and agentic is one of those clear spaces. Google's mission is to organize the world's information. You probably all understand that, but it's also to make it universally accessible and useful. So we are moving from giving people information to helping them get things done, and that's agentic. But what does governance look in this space? And it's where, and I'll be super brief because there's not a lot of time, we are going back to our principles, to those AI principles, and what does it mean to make sure that we are being accountable? So how do we make sure that there still are those humans in the loop? Where is the best place to have that? Then if we're looking about making sure that we're not that we continue to make sure that we're avoiding creating or reinforcing unfair bias, what does that look like? We're asking agents to take steps, and a lot of it is stuff that we've touched on already. What data is being used? How are we making sure that we're red teaming? But still those same principles. But I'd say agentic is the area that to answer your question, whether it's still agree.
All right, no, that could be a unanimous answer, and I did promise you I'll ask you one follow-up. So do you see in the next 12 odd months or more the questions in governance when we think about copyright? Do you think we'll get to a better place in terms of our understanding and a kind of a shared way of looking at it?
If I could take the entire 4 minutes to answer that question. I think that the discussion around use of data for AI will be one that will continue, and I think we will probably get to a more nuanced position where we are looking at both what's the benefit of the models and how do we put in place governance standards when it comes to the output of the models.
All right, thank you. And India is having a lot of interesting conversation on this topic, so we hope we contribute to that discussion. Ivana, you explained it so well. I'm tempted to skip you, but no, I'll ask you a follow-up question. I have a great question for you. Sorry, that was a joke. So if you take a kind of an example, you know, like a important use case, maybe it's healthcare, maybe it's the government services, and when you are really deploying a lot of those digital transformation solutions, can you walk us through that in some of these things, that how does governance really play out? Are there even standards where the, at least from a government point of view, do they know how to assess for this? Because a lot of the time, from a technology point of view, it just slows down adoption. So, so governance as a way of making sure that they are able to adopt faster. Where are we in the world? Are we still in early days, or we are much better?
Yeah, I mean, I think it varies, if I may say, in the sense that I think a lot of organizations, they have set up, a lot of our clients, they've set up governance structures. And to an extent, they realize when it comes to actual implementation of AI and transformation, that is not enough. And that's where I think it's really important, because starting from acceptability criteria of use cases, right? To bringing the whole organization from the legal team to the risk managers, that is also where they're struggling, okay? And it's normal, because we are all evolving so quickly in this space, okay? So so there is co-creation, I would say, on that, in the sense that depends on the organization, obviously, but across different areas of the organization, there is a request to say, hey, how are you going to support with these areas, okay? That's one element. Then there is another element where they say, for example, okay, we're doing this specific transformation in healthcare, and they say, how do we make sure that we have privacy, cybersecurity, resilience, data protection, and legal safeguards embedded in what we're doing? And that's the complex one, because that's where you, as a deployer, you offer your view. You say, for example, our platforms, that's how we've created them, right? But they also say to you, that's where also negotiations and issues around liabilities, all that comes in. And this is where the tools become important, because this is where India can play a big role.
So what will help?
Sorry?
What will help further? Because we are so interested in adoption.
Yes, I think what helps forward is, so the techno-legal approach is going to be crucial here. And this is where India can lead, is creating tools that enable sort of the clients and the customers that we serve to really be able to manage the governance.
So I'm going to take that, and I'm going to move to our last speaker. Wilfredo, I think I'm going to give you a kind of a scenario. So, and this is about the shared, I want to get your perspective on the shared liability, how it sits between society, the user, in the sense, and the government and the regulator. So let's talk about a teenager who's using Grok, and what would you set as a default experience in terms of what controls should lie with the parents, and in some sense with the user itself, and what are that kind of a scene where you would expect government to lay down the rules, and where do you think as a platform you would set the default? Help us understand a little bit of that.
Yeah, I think that question is one that governments around the world are wrestling with when it comes to AI, or when it comes to use of social media. I mean, we've seen the Australians ban social media for kids under 16. We're seeing those similar types of proposals all around the world. And they're not easy. I mean, what is the role of the parent in their child's use of technology? I think parents are grappling with that every single day, and that's not for a company to dictate. And certainly governments around the world have different norms and expectations, and I think the implementation of this is going to vary, and we will comply with the laws of the countries in which we operate. But I think, and this is a question, I've been at Twitter and X and XAI for a while now. We dealt with this on the X platform and social media in general. It's like, what is, X is not really catered to teenagers. We don't have a lot of teenage users. But what is a teenager's right to access information, right? And now with AI, what is their right to have, the universe's knowledge at their fingertips? But I think we can all agree, right? There are some fundamental safeguards that we all agree. There's illegal behavior that we can all agree on that we want to prevent, right? We want to prevent child sexual abuse and other forms of child safety. We want to prevent self-harm, right? We don't want our platforms, being used, to facilitate harm, right? And that's really what it comes down to. What foreseeable harm can we see with the use of this technology?
All right.
And that's sort of what guides us.
We entirely get your message.
Yep.
And we're going to take that for a resounding yes for governance at least. And with that, so Karina, thank you for joining us. Wilfredo, it's your first visit here. So delighted to have you. And
I'll finish up my points next time.
Oh no, and Gail, equally delighted to have you here. Thank you, and Ivana as always, and Jules. It has been wonderful talking to you, and you guys have been a wonderful audience. Thank you very much. This is Ashish Agarwal from NASSCOM, and this is the end of our panel. Thank you.
Sirs, if you could just come into the front, please.